One morning in the city of Buffalo, reporter Bruce Nolan is recording a news story about a bakery. Despite being dissatisfied with his work, he follows the recording with his good humor and wants to prove that the bakery has the biggest cookie in town. When the cookie is ready, it surpasses the city record, and Bruce's story is a success. Later, Bruce reviews the story with his girlfriend, Grace. She says she loved what she saw and tries to support him, but he believes that these funny recordings will never make him a news anchor. The next morning, Bruce starts his routine for work. He has to get to the newspaper early for a meeting about the day's stories. Before that, he drops Grace off at work, where a blood drive is taking place. Grace gives him a necklace made by her students to bring him luck. Unfortunately, the necklace doesn't work, and Bruce gets stuck in a traffic jam. When he arrives at work late, the meeting is already over, and the story chosen is that of Evan Baxter, a reporter and Bruce's greatest rival. Desperate, Bruce talks to his supervisor and friend, Jack, who offers him an opportunity to broadcast a live report from Niagara Falls. Bruce accepts and, a few moments later, goes to make the recording on the Maid of the Mist ship, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary. He prepares to interview the ship's owner, but during the broadcast, the newspaper announces that its main anchor is quitting. The problem is that Evan offers to do this farewell and even announces that he will be the new anchor. Upon discovering that he's been passed over by his colleague, Bruce has a nervous breakdown and, as well as sabotaging the story, swears at everyone on the live show. As expected, he is tired. Bruce picks up his things and goes to his car, but he sees a homeless man being attacked by a gang. He arrives on the scene to defend the guy, but the gang doesn't like it at all, and they all run after him. Bruce tries to run away, but the thugs catch him, beat him up, and scratch his car door. Bruce returns home and starts blaming God for all his problems. Grace tries to comfort him, but he won't accept her help and says he can't stand their mediocre life any longer. These words hurt Grace, but Bruce doesn't care and decides to leave the house to cool off. On the road, he tries to ask God for a miracle. He takes the opportunity to pick up the amulet Grace gave him but accidentally drops it in the car. Bruce tries to pick it up but doesn't pay attention to the road, and his car crashes into a lamppost, destroying the entire hood. This accident becomes the last straw in his life. He then throws the necklace into the middle of the sea and starts taunting God. Suddenly, his beeper starts ringing and shows a mysterious number, but Bruce just ignores it. The next day, he keeps getting calls from the same phone, which makes him lose his temper and throw the beeper out of the window into the street. Just then, Sam goes back to pee in the house, and Bruce takes him outside. To his surprise, he sees that the beeper is still ringing, with the number that called earlier. Even though it's completely destroyed, Bruce decides to answer the call and receives a very tempting job offer. He goes to the address, but finds an abandoned building in a strange alley. The place doesn't look too promising for him, and when he enters the building, he meets a janitor. The guy tells him to go up to the 7th floor. Arriving on the 7th floor, Bruce finds an empty corridor where an electrician is fixing the light. However, the guy turns out to be the same man who used to work as a janitor. In a matter of seconds, he changes his uniform for a white suit and tie. Bruce finds the whole thing strange, but it gets worse when the mysterious man claims to know everything about his life, which is recorded in a cupboard in the living room. Bruce goes to the cupboard to investigate, but when he opens it, a gigantic drawer comes out and pushes him away. Frightened by all this, he asks who the mysterious man is, who replies that he is none other than God. Bruce finds this absurd and tries to prove that it's all a deception. He challenges God to guess how many fingers he has raised, but the Lord gets it right every time. In yet another attempt, Bruce cheats and puts up 7 fingers, but then changes to 5. But his hand gains 2 extra fingers, which sends him into a panic. After this scare, God makes Bruce an offer to have his powers for a week and prove that he can do God's work better than he can. Bruce agrees. He rushes towards the car, still unable to believe what is happening. Bruce ends up in a diner. While waiting for his coffee, he decides to see if he really has God's powers. First, he pulls out the sugar jar with the power of his mind and then manages to summon a spoon, which comes out of his mouth. Finally, when the attendant brings him some soup, he uses his power to separate it just as Moses did with the Red Sea. With the powers of the Almighty, he begins to test them out on the street and uses them to change his ordinary clothes for more elegant ones. However, his target is now the gang that beat him up the day before. He finally finds them in an alley and orders them all to apologize for the sin of attacking him. The whole gang starts laughing, and the leader says he'll only ask for forgiveness if a monkey comes out of him. Bruce complies, and a monkey comes out of him. The other members get scared and run for their lives, but Bruce shoots a swarm of bees out of his mouth to chase them. Bruce returns home, ready to reconcile with Grace. He brings flowers, plays romantic music, and uses his power to clear the clouds from the sky and bring the moon closer to the window. The two make up and enjoy the best night of their lives. The next day, Bruce begins to hear voices in his head that sound like orders. He ignores them and sets off to get his job back. He gets into his old wrecked car and turns it into a luxury vehicle with his divine power. On the way, he comes across another traffic jam. But with a simple flick of his fingers, he pushes all the cars aside and speeds past. Minutes later, Bruce arrives at a dog training center. However, a rival journalist has already recorded the story. Bruce uses his divine powers, and at that moment, a dog starts digging in the middle of the field. The dog finds the missing body of a great authority in the United States. He grabs his camera and records this unique and exclusive story. The success of the report leads Bruce to be acclaimed at the newspaper where he used to work. He then meets with Jack, who can't hire him as an anchor now but promises to give him his job back if he brings in more stories. Bruce wastes no time in using divine intervention to get the best stories. At a food fair, he conjures up a meteor which falls in the middle of a nearby field. Thanks to news like this, Bruce becomes known as one of the best reporters in the country. One day at work, he sees Evan as the new news anchor and decides to take revenge. He uses his power to mess with Evan's voice, change the text on the teleprompter, and even control his rival's mouth and make him say nonsensical things. Evan loses his anchor position. With this news, Bruce decides to celebrate and calls Grace for a romantic dinner. He approaches his girlfriend to give her some important news, but she is disappointed to discover that the news is about his promotion to anchor. Before she can express her disappointment, Bruce begins to be tormented by the voices in his head. He then leaves the restaurant to try to calm down until he suddenly ends up on Mount Everest. There, he meets God, who warns him about the voices. He explains that they are prayers from the residents of Buffalo, and that if Bruce continues to ignore them, they will accumulate more and more. Back at home, Bruce tries to organize people's prayers into files and notes, but none of these options work. He decides to put them all in the form of emails on a computer. Although the idea is good, thousands of messages soon appear at the same time. And even though Bruce answers them all quickly, more prayers appear. To make his life easier, he decides to grant everyone's requests at the same time without thinking about the consequences of this decision. Later, Bruce goes to a work party, but Grace doesn't want to go because she's still fighting with him about the night before. He leaves her a message on the phone, at which point Susan appears in front of him and tries to win him over. Bruce ends up giving in just as Grace arrives at the party and sees everything. She decides to put an end to their relationship and leaves for her sister's house. The next day, Grace starts her routine and begins to receive strange signals, such as messages in trees and clouds with declarations of love. Unbeknownst to her, they were all sent by Bruce to convince her to get back together. None of this helps. So Bruce decides to go to the school where she works so that they can talk. He tries to make amends and asks her to come back, but Grace won't accept. Hours later, Bruce's debut as an anchorman is about to take place. The news reports that the meteor he invoked has caused the destruction of several power transformers, causing a power outage throughout the city. The residents are outraged by this and start wreaking havoc all over the city. Nevertheless, Bruce is preparing to fulfill his dream in front of the cameras. Just as the news is about to start, the lights go out due to a power cut. Bruce manages to activate them again, but the lights keep going out. Jack stops the broadcast and warns that outside the newspaper, people are causing a huge riot. Realizing that the whole town has gone mad because of him, Bruce decides to leave the show and resolve the situation. Outside, the city of Buffalo has become chaotic. Residents attack each other, set cars on fire, and rob all the stores in the neighborhood. Bruce despairs and asks for God's help. He is teleported to the building where he received the Almighty's powers. God appears once again dressed as a janitor. Bruce asks how he can do his job and help people. God replies that he won't be able to do this with divine power, but with his own efforts, and that only then will he be able to perform miracles. God says goodbye, and then Bruce returns home, still feeling sorry for having pushed Grace away. He decides to finish the photo album of the two of them to give her as a present. The next day, Bruce faces yet another traffic jam. But instead of using his powers, he follows God's advice and waits. He sees a man with a broken car and decides to help him with his own efforts. When he arrives at work, Bruce takes another benevolent approach and gives Evan his anchor position back. He then asks Jack for his job back as a reporter, as he wants to continue with stories that make people laugh. Debbie appears and says she's come to collect her sister's things. Bruce lets her in and hands her the photo album. Moved by this act, Debbie tells Bruce that even though they are separated, Grace always dedicates her prayers to him. Bruce goes to his computer and finds his ex-girlfriend's prayers. Seconds later, a new message appears indicating that Grace is in the middle of yet another prayer. Bruce travels there and realizes that she is asking God to allow her to forget him because she still loves him. Devastated by these words, Bruce walks through the rain, feeling even more guilty for not having valued Grace. He kneels down in the middle of the road and asks God to help him. However, a speeding truck appears in front of him, and he is run over. Shortly afterward, Bruce appears as a spirit in a space full of light and meets God, who is waiting for him. The Almighty gives him back Grace's necklace and tells him that if he has a request to make, all he has to do is pray willingly. Bruce makes a request for the good of humanity, but God knows that his true desire is to get back with Grace. However, Bruce asks for her to find someone who really appreciates her as he should have done in life. This prayer convinces God, and he decides to grant his request. He then shocks Bruce with his fingers, which causes his spirit to return to his body. He wakes up in a hospital bed and sees that someone has donated a bag of blood to him of the same type as Grace's. Seconds later, he finds her in his room and realizes that she not only gave some of her blood, but also stayed by his side during his recovery. Bruce then asks for forgiveness for what he did, and the two finally resume their relationship. A few days later, he recovers from the accident and returns to work. This time, he covers a story about a blood donation campaign that Grace is taking part in and also announces their wedding on TV. The story is another success, and for the first time in his life, Bruce is satisfied with his work. After the shoot is over, he meets up with Grace to donate blood as well. Nearby, the same homeless man Bruce helped appears on the scene and suddenly takes on the form of God. Thank you for watching.